Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 17th of July, 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to be joined by David Ellis from Strategic Defence Initiatives. The lovely lady.
The lovely lady has been elected. Now, I'm just going to show a little bit of the coverage from the European Parliament yesterday of the results of the vote for Ursula von der Leyen to become president of the European Commission. Really the thing to look at here is her face as this plays out. So just have a watch of this.
Votes 733. A majority of members that make up the Parliament 374. Votes in favour 383.
Now, I have to say, Brian, that it was a look of absolute relief and thanks, really.
Happiness, joy.
But there was definite relief there. She wasn't sure that she was going to get it. Now, just to briefly look at the results themselves. Only 733 people turned up to vote. In fact, 747 MPs is the number that there are, so a few didn't bother. She got 383, which is above just about above the majority that she needed. And so that's her set to take office on the 1st of November this year for 5 years. What happens next is that she now sends official letters to member states, to the heads of state or government, inviting them to propose candidates for members of the Commission. Those hearings for that will take place 30th of September to the 8th of October, and we get to find out who the other commissioners are. So that's all very exciting. But in the meantime, then she announced. Sorry, I've messed that up a little bit. I apologise. She announced her priorities. So a European Green Deal, an economy that works for people. I think we hear that in Britain quite a lot. Europe fit for the digital age. Again, we hear that in Britain quite a lot. Protecting our European way of life. A stronger Europe in the world. Well, of course, a stronger Europe in the world. That's defence union she's talking about there. A new push for European democracy and much more, as they say. Now, you got a bit of a preview of this one, because of course, what she said, during her acceptance speech was she attacked China by saying some are buying their influence by investing in dependence from ports and roads. That's really referring to the Belt and Road project. Some turn to authoritarian states. We go the European way. So I wonder what that means. She went on to say this. Our most pressing challenge is to keep our planet healthy. This is the greatest and most important opportunity of our time. I want Europe to become the first CO2 neutral continent in the world by 2050. To make this happen, we must take both steps together. Our current goal of reducing emissions by 40% by 2030 is not enough. We must go further. We must try for more. A two-step approach is needed to reduce CO2 emissions by 2030 by 50%, if not 55%. The European Union will lead international negotiations to increase the level of ambition by other major economies by 2021, because to achieve real impact, we do not only have to be ambitious at home, we have to do that, yes, but we have to do it together. I will put forward a Green Deal for Europe in my first 100 days in office. I will put forward the first ever European climate law, which will set the 2050 target in law. And she spent quite a bit of her time discussing how important the rule of law is in all this. Now, the mention of China, of course, refers to China's influence in Africa, a place where Ursula strongly feels it's her territory, actually. As we pointed out last week on this programme, she's taken the covers off EU Defence Union now, a project which for her is all about Africa. So we published this article immediately after the announcement of her election last night. EU Defence Union spelled out by new President of the Commission. I would ask everybody to read that. And to distribute it as far and wide as possible. It's really important, as we'll discuss with David Ellis in a moment, now that she has taken the covers off this policy, we've got to get this being discussed in the UK. But there was one thing, Brian, that struck me yesterday, because before the vote, all the various members of the European Parliament that wanted to say something or to intervene in the decision got an opportunity to do so. And Nigel Farage got up to speak. And I thought it was interesting that last night, when I saw the mainstream media coverage of Farage's comments, they focused on the first half of what he said, and a little bit of that's included in what I'm just about to show you. But they completely ignored the second half of what he said. And I have to say, Brian, for the first time, Farage has got up and spoken in the European Parliament, and really I find very little to criticise about it. But let's have a listen to this and then we can talk about it.
The European Council stitch-up has rendered this place impotent until today, when you've got some real power if you choose to use it. What you've seen from Ursula von der Leyen today is an attempt for the European Union to take control of every single aspect of our lives. She wants to build a centralised, undemocratic, updated form of communism that will render nation-state parliaments, where the state controls everything, where nation-state parliaments will cease to have any relevance at all. But it is in the aspects of defence that I think people's minds should be focused. She's a fanatic for building a European army, but she's not alone. When it's completed, NATO will cease to exist or have any relevance in Europe at all. And of course, not to be left out of this, French President Emmanuel Macron, on Bastille Day last Sunday, stood at the front of an open-top car with his nascent European Defence Force behind him, looking for all the world like an updated version of Napoleon. Be in no doubt, 5 years of these people, the European Defence Union will be complete. And what is there for defence can also be used for attack. And you as a House will have no control over it. Vote against this nominee, strike a blow for democracy, strike a blow for your citizens. Do it today.
So what do you think?
Well, for the first time, of course, he's used the right expression, which is EU Defence Union, and quite remarkable that he's ended on that key point that it's defence union, but what's it been coupled with? Rhetoric for war against Russia. So I've got to say, Nigel Farage on this occasion absolute hammered it. And can I just add to that, Mike, that it was interested that Ursula, what did she say? She's saying all the squidgy things. She's talking about CO2. She's talking about equal opportunities. She's not talking about we are going to deal with Russia. Now she's got her foot in the door. Here's the cloak coming in. But I did pick up on a lot more money for Erasmus. So this is the EU going to make sure that it trains and integrates students all the way across the EU, which is very dangerous because they're obviously going for the future generations.
Let's welcome David Ellis to the programme. David, I'm impressed that Nigel Farage said what he said there. The question that I ask in my article is, it's all very well for him to say that in the European Parliament, but will he bring the same language and the same points back to the UK?
That is the question, absolutely, is whether that conversation is going to happen here in the UK, considering that we're in every aspect of defence union as it stands. So he's given a really, really great speech there. It's the first time he's used the correct language, tone and sort of pitch, and he's hit all the real sweet spots. Some of them even sound as if they were, the things that we've said. So, he's quite right. This is not just an internal, it's not just an external potential force, it's an internal force. And of course, what can defend can also attack. He's absolutely right. But that's the key thing, really, and I think you've got a taste of it already, that the media this side of the channel has decided to not broadcast the section there on EU Defence Union, which is clearly von der Leyen and the EU's now top of the agenda must-have objective. So she's really, I mean, cloaking it all up there, as you quite rightly said, Brian, with CO2 and whatnot. Well, the CO2 agenda is just to lock down the population. It's got nothing to do really with any serious issues. So I just find it just ridiculous, really, to say that there's an election and a ballot, because, as I understand it, it was only her name on the paper, and you could either vote, in favour or not. There was no other candidates. So, to call it an election is a sort of nonsense, really. It's a rubber stamp, isn't it? So, the table is set, and really we've got to thank von der Leyen to an extent, because she's made it very much a public debate now. So what was clearly for decades a civil service and secretive behind closed doors conversation is now an open conversation in Europe. It just needs to be an open conversation here in the UK. And that's our big objective now.
Absolutely. Now, what prospect do you think, now that Nigel Farage has got on the bandwagon and decided to use the correct terminology, do you think there's any prospect of this issue getting into the Tory leadership debate before the election happens there?
That's exactly the question, isn't it? That pressure there that's developed with all those new MEPs are clearly now aware of it, and they've got to propagate it here and do some good with it. It's got to become a cross-party subject here in the UK, because it's going to concern everyone and everything. Because sooner or later, if this carries on, or it comes back in whatever the new form of agreement is, I mean, we've got to sort of look at it in terms of that the May deal may well be dead at the moment, but that's only for the time being. It's not to say that it doesn't regroup and carry on. Von der Leyen's talking about extending the leaving period, which of course just gives more opportunity to carry on with this. So that really is something that doesn't want to be happening on either account, either the defence union coming to a conclusion or that deal coming back in a repackaged form. So the key thing really is that this has to happen now on the Conservative Party benches. And I was just on the telephone this morning talking to a former head of the Navy, and that's exactly the conversation that we had, that at the moment, the political scene in Westminster is that the MPs, and I'm understanding that this is regardless of party, are being told that there's nothing to worry about with defence union, which of course isn't the case at all. That's a complete misrepresentation, because as it stands, we're in it. But what they're being told is there's nothing to worry, and we're not in it. And it's almost like this okey-cokey situation, in, out, shake it all about. And they're not really paying it the correct regard. Hopefully that's now going to change, because if we can get the 17.4 million people to have a conversation with the rest of Britain, there'll be a majority in the country to sort of come together on this, and hopefully we will actually get our country back.
Yeah, just come in if I may, David, and I don't want to draw you on this too much, but we've been hearing some strange rumours, we'll call it, that all of the good work that UK Column has done to highlight this EU defence union and get the truth out has certainly ruffled a few feathers in the political establishment. And we've been hearing that maybe a few people are to be put under pressure with the excuse that if you blow the whistle on what the EU's really planning, and maybe Nigel Farage is quite right to have ramped up the business, does defence turn to offence in Eastern Europe? But if we highlight these issues, we are going to be under the spotlight of the security services and 77 Brigade. Can you tell us anything about that?
That seems to be the case. Anecdotally, what's being fed back to me and others is that this is the case. So if we look at one end of the spectrum, as I've already said, so this head of service is obviously opposed to being in defence union, and a lot of them seem to be. But what they're being told is that we're not in, and there's nothing to worry about, and move on, and there's nothing to see, and there's no real show. Well, of course, that isn't the case at all, and they would want you to think that. But at the other end of the spectrum, of course, is what we're being told is that there's a huge amount of interest all of a sudden in anybody that's speaking on veterans issues or defence union at the MOD. So this obviously doesn't quite add up with, well, if there's nothing to worry about, then why would you do that? So that doesn't stack up, frankly. So what's being perceived as a threat to the MOD is that if you're talking about defence union or veterans issues. So I find that rather a compliment on the one hand and alarming on the other. So what we've got to do is expose this, get it all out in the open, talk about it, and certainly not shy away from it. This has to be discussed openly because, either end of what's going on there in Westminster is frankly unacceptable. So the best way to deal with it, rightly, as you've always done there for years, Brian, is get it out in the open and let's talk about it. And of course, there's no place to hide then. So if this is the case, obviously now Nigel Farage will be number one on the most wanted list at the MOD.
Just finally on this, David, one of the points that Farage made is that, von der Leyen has a 5-year term. He's saying that by the time that 5-year term is up, defence union will be in place and so on. Now, let's give the MOD, we know that this isn't the case, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say that Britain is not part of a defence union. The other point that Farage made is that defence union represents the end of NATO, but the Ministry of Defence's position is that Britain's military capability is secure within NATO. So those two positions don't seem to be viable to be sitting side by side. So the Ministry of Defence, it seems to me, can't have it both ways. So they've got to answer that question, don't they? Because if Farage is right and NATO's role within Europe is finished as a result of defence union, Britain says it's staying outside defence union, and but that NATO is the core pillar of its defence capability. Well, where does that leave us? That for no other reason than that, this issue has to be discussed publicly now.
It's absolutely correct. Absolutely correct, because there can't be, where a lot of people have put the crutch on NATO prior to Brexit and then carried on putting the kind of, the national crutch against and with NATO. Of course, NATO is a key pillar of defence union, and Farage is completely correct in my submission. I'll agree with him on that, once defence union is up and accelerated and comes to topping out, as von der Leyen is saying next year, there'll be no place for NATO. And I've got to say that I think one or two peers I've spoke to on this have been very, very particular early on with this, and that was that there would not be two pots of money. There would only be one pot of money, and that would equate to then that there wouldn't be NATO. So you can see how that's going to work, because they're already talking about the finance systems and the Treasury and the Defence Fund, and then what will obviously then be taxation at the other end of that to the general public. So this is exactly the case. They can't carry on under this ambiguity. And I've got to say, really, that the last defence question I saw in the Lords, from Admiral Lord West to Earl Howe, really articulated this beautifully, because what Lord West was asking for was a commitment to Royal Navy frigates. The 13, I understand, a ridiculous figure for a seafaring nation. So an untenable figure. But of course, what he didn't get was any kind of firm commitment back on either a national basis as Britain and the Royal Navy, or whether we would be in defence union and it would be under that basis. So the whole NATO thing now, really, Farage actually is singing from the same hymn sheet as Trump, because Trump has said for quite some time, even before he went on the campaign trail and announced his candidacy to be president, he was saying that NATO was dead. And I fundamentally believe that he had some good intelligence and some good, let's say accurate intelligence being fed to him from what must have been senior officers saying that this was coming and this was the case, because defence union can only really go one way, and there isn't going to be two pots of money. So, people are not going to fund a national force. They're not going to fund NATO and defence union. That's not going to happen.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Well, can we trust the BBC to get the truth out about what's happening in Europe? We don't think so. Several viewers raised interest with this BBC Newsnight interview, so we'll just have a little look at part of it. It's between a gentleman called Rod Liddle of The Spectator. He's written a book called The Great Betrayal, and Tom Baldwin, who is the communications director for the People's Vote. Let's listen.
Brexit hasn't been the problem. The ineptitude of the politicians and also the deliberate betrayal by some of those politicians, including quite a lot on the Remainer side, that has been the problem. There's been no inherent problem with Brexit. Now, I would leave with no deal. I would prefer to leave with no deal than to leave with the deal which the ERGers voted for.
Isn't the truth that actually there is complete unity here, because you're delighted that we haven't Brexited yet, and you're delighted that you can get angry about it because that's your currency. You can get everyone up in arms.
But that's what he does. He's economist. He's economist.
That's a bit fatuous, isn't it?
That's what you do.
I'm sitting. My point is that I'm angry because we haven't left.
No, look,
and I'm representing the people, trying to represent the people, and that's why I've written the book.
Look, Rod,
who are angry that they haven't left. To say that I'm pleased because I'm a columnist
You're not just angry that we haven't left. You say that the Remainer argument was that all Leavers were basically racist and xenophobes.
Pardon, sorry, I said...
You pretty much say that the Remainer argument is that all Leavers are basically racist and xenophobes.
No, I say that that was one of the big tropes of the referendum campaign. Didn't work very well. Obviously, telling the people you want to vote for you that they're thick, racist, uneducated, and even worse than any of those things, old, didn't play very well. But it has helped some of the MPs to assuage their fears of going against the public vote by saying, well, they
That's the language you use. Would you describe yourself as a racist? Because many see you that way.
Well, no, obviously not. But I am used to going on BBC programmes and being accused of such things when there is no evidence.
When all you do is write about suicide bombers blowing themselves up in Tower Hamlets, or a black Labour MP, Kate Osamore, saying she only got the job because her skin colour.
Do you have to, at every possible juncture, show the BBC's grotesque bias?
But these are your words, Rod.
These are your words.
You wrote them.
Well, so she's only paid £200,000 a year for that.
A classic ambush, isn't it? You get somebody on Newsnight in order to discuss the betrayal of people in the UK by politicians. We voted for Brexit, we haven't got it. And what does she do? She's straight in with a character assassination, accusing him of being a racist, which he responded to, I think, pretty effectively. But classic BBC bias demonstrated on the programme in front of our eyes. But there was a lot more to it. Let's just have a look at what Tom Baldwin said a bit later. He says, look, when you're in a democratic crisis like this, when MPs can't decide what to do, when the country is divided, I'm not a huge fan of referendums. I spent 2015 at the general election opposing David Cameron's reckless decision to have a referendum. I'm not jumping up with the joy of the thought of having another one, but I do think this is the way to solve the crisis. So this man was working with Ed Miliband in order to stop the referendum which Cameron had proposed. But now he said, well, we've already had a referendum. We don't like that one. We need another referendum to solve the present crisis. So I think the hypocrisy of this man is breathtaking. The response from Rod Liddle was this, but democracy is already spoken, which I think was fair enough. So we've got some really good content coming out, particularly of Rod Liddle. But I wonder how many of you actually were paying attention to the video itself. Let's just have a look at what you were seeing on screen. So Rod Liddle on the left, Tom Baldwin there next to him, and Emily Maitlis, who was the very unpleasant BBC interviewer. But what have we got in the background? Well, if you note that Leave is here on the screen, largely blurred out, but forefront and right in front of your eyes, we've got a big Remain here, and we've also got another big Remain. And several people have emailed me this morning to say, this is amazing. Are we watching manipulation of people by what is projected on the backdrop as this interview goes on? Now, there's a bit more to it, because if you look to the right of the central image of UK, there's actually another image of stylised image of UK, which is quite remarkable because clearly it is UK broken into pieces. I've spent quite a lot of time looking at this, and obviously designers have been working very hard on what people were shown in the backdrop as this interview took place. So we've got a Remain, which is put right in front of the viewer. Leave is all blurred out, and they are crowing, I think, over the fact this whole debate is breaking up the country. So we've got BBC Newsnight using applied behavioural psychology, NLP, many people are saying, in order to influence how people react to this programme. But if we put Emily, the lovely Emily, centre screen, we can see some of this a bit better. The first thing to note is that the Remain has also got a tick box. Now, if they'd have ticked it, it would have been a bit too obvious. So it's crossed, but nevertheless, what are they putting across? Remain. That's where your tick should go.
But you normally put a cross in a
well,
ballot
you
paper,
do,
don't you?
but I just in front of your viewer, so you could say it's accurate and effective. And then to the left of her, it almost looks like a cartoon head, but that is a stylised image of Britain which has been broken up. So I think this Newsnight, absolute classic bias on one hand by the BBC of the character assassination of somebody daring to go down the Brexit route, but we've got something very unpleasant being done to audiences in the background. Now, what can we do about this? Well, I'm going to say a big thanks to the person who sent us this and said, I think that these little badges would be very good and very effective. So we have a little cheap button style badge. It says, is that true? Or did you hear it on the BBC? And I really felt there was something in this. So I'm going to say, if there's anybody out there who would like to source and put in some orders for some of these badges, I think they might go down well across the country. But can we trust the BBC? We don't think so.
David, can we trust the BBC?
Well, it's, what more have you got to say looking at that absolute stitch up? You'll just see it over and over again. Just don't tune in, don't watch it. Turn off. Don't give them any air.
Well, and look, we've got to say again, don't give them any money. So right. Well, look, let's move on to this now. As you know, we covered this extensively last week. The Defend Media Freedom Conference, which is being held by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in London, along with the Canadian Foreign Office. We're asking the question what this was all about. Of course, they were saying it was about protecting journalists at risk from imprisonment or from torture or from death in other countries. But of course, we made the point that it was backed by this organisation, Luminate, and that really perhaps it was more to do with the Luminate's agenda, which is a world where people and institutions can work together to build just and fair society. So it's all about changing foreign countries and so on. And we were making the point that the UK government was putting money into aid packages into helping in this situation. So this was Harriet Baldwin, the International Development Minister, highlighting the fact that she was about to spend £15 million on an aid package for journalism abroad, which included £12 million for a consortium led by BBC Media Action to help existing media improve their business models. And again, we highlighted what BBC Media Action is all about, which is about intervention in foreign countries. And we also mentioned the fact that Jeremy Hunt had announced his own funding, in this case to deal with fake news and disinformation. He was saying that with only 10% of the world's population having access to free media, fake news and disinformation continue to undermine and destabilise societies. And he was announcing a package of £18 million, which was part of a £100 million package from the Foreign Commonwealth Office to counter disinformation, and that this money was coming from the Conflict Stability and Security Fund, which of course is the same pot of money which went to fund the White Helmets and so on. So I found this interesting, thought we'd do a little bit of work on it. I just want to remind everybody, if you go to the UK Column website and have a look at the Integrity Initiative section there's a page of information about the Integrity Initiative, if you remember, which was this Foreign and Commonwealth Office funded counter-disinformation, as they described it, counter-disinformation program. Well, of course, a lot of Integrity Initiative documents were leaked. We covered that leak extensively, and the Integrity Initiative's website is still down as of today. So all content, they say, has been temporarily removed from this site pending an investigation into the theft of data from the Institute for Statecraft and its program, the Integrity Initiative. And in fact, the Institute for Statecraft's website is in the same state. All content has been temporarily removed from this site pending an investigation into the theft of data from the Institute for Statecraft and its program, the Integrity Initiative. So that's good. Both websites say they'll be back up and running again soon. So this hasn't gone away. But in the meantime, this organization has been established. The Open Information Partnership is a diverse network of established organizations and individuals across Europe working in open, independent, fact-based reporting is how they describe it. So this is Andy Price and his counter-disinformation team not being idle. They've set this organization up. Well, it was revealed in a parliamentary question to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office a couple of months ago. This was answered by Alan Duncan, and he had this to say. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office's own dedicated counter-disinformation and media development program aims to protect national security by countering disinformation directed at the UK and its allies from Russia. It funds projects in a number of different countries that seek to enhance independent media, support civil society organisations that expose disinformation, and share good practice with partner governments. So this is Sopian language once again, as we talked about on the programme yesterday. It's got a hidden meaning. So when he says support civil society organisations that expose disinformation, what he means is support civil society organisations that promote the Foreign Commonwealth Office narrative in countries which have a media of their own, which may present a different point of view. So he went on to say this. In particular, we're supporting a new open information partnership of European non-governmental organisations, charities, academics, think tanks and journalists which are working to respond to manipulated information in the news, social media and across the public space. So that's what this organisation is all about, the Open Information Partnership. But when we go and look at who they're working with, what do we find? Well, Bellingcat, of course, involved with this, the Atlantic Council, Media Diversity, an organisation, an NGO there, and another NGO called Zinc Network, supported and funded, they say, by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. So I just chose one of them. I mean, everybody will be familiar with Bellingcat, everybody will be familiar with the Atlantic Council. So I chose one of the other two to have a look at. And here is the Zinc website. This is all about people-powered change. You may have noticed the guy wearing a dress there with a beard, so we can sort of see what this is all about. This is all about people-powered change. They're one of the partners in this new organisation. In fact, last year, they put this proposal, and this proposal is available on the internet if anybody wants to go and look for it. It's entitled A Network of NGOs. It's a technical proposal. It was given to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, specifically to Andy Price at the Counter-Disinformation and Media Development team. And as we can see, we look at the consortium partners, we find that the Institute for Statecraft is right there in the middle of that lot. And a couple of the Bellingcat is there, Media Diversity is there as well. So
Digital Forensic Research Lab is
so
another key one.
That's Atlantic Council, yeah. DFR Lab. So all the key players in this new organisation are there. And I suggest people track this down and have a look at it. Now, this was a proposal which resulted in £10 million of funding for this organisation. Although this was dated August 2018, the Open Information Partnership domain name was registered in February this year, so they clearly got the funding that they wanted. So I'm going to say that I believe this is what last week's conference on media freedom was all about. Integrity Initiative has not gone away. Andy Price has a bigger budget than ever. The Foreign Commonwealth Office is putting people in foreign countries to pretend to be journalists, but in fact they're agents. They're agents of the Foreign Office. They're there to promote the Foreign Office-backed narrative in the name of countering disinformation. And this Media Freedom Conference was all about building a level of protection for these people, these agents, a level of protection that, in my opinion, they've no real right to expect. Brian, I don't know if you've got a different view on that, but if people are going into countries under the auspices of, for example, BBC Media Action, in order to bring about the change that the British Foreign Office wants to see, then that is not journalism. That is not a free media.
No, it's a political activist, Mike. That's quite clearly the line that's crossed from an independent journalist or a national journalist. You suddenly become a change agent for the British government. And of course, we could argue that journalists in Iran, as one example, are paying the price of this, whether they knew what they were doing or not.
David, have you any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's come back new and improved, isn't it? They've really took on board the sort of thrashing they got with the Integrity Initiative and all the issues there, and they've come back with a new and improved model. So this isn't about media freedom. This is about hiving off government taxpayers' money, which needs to be challenged. So that's the first and principal way of dealing with this. People need to challenge their MP to cut the money supply off to this, because this is clearly about an attempt to control the narrative. This isn't about media press freedom. This is about factions that wish to control a narrative to suit their own means. So what people have got to do is and I keep saying this, the only thing that people have got available to do anything about this is their MPs. Get onto their MP, get the money turned off. They've got to do a Lord Owen on this. When Lord Owen turned off this effectively the forerunner to this office there, the countering the Soviet narrative office. We've got to do what he did. And that's got to be reworked.
Yeah, indeed. He did that while he was Foreign Secretary and before he became Lord Owen, of course. Now, just to briefly mention that the Mirror had this article, others similar articles today, fatal mistake that led to MH17 being gunned down, killing 298 people on board. Well, the question is this a project of the Open Information Partnership? Because this is a propaganda piece. It features Elliot Higgins of Bellingcat, one of the partner organisations, so possibly it is. Well, I think if you want some counter propaganda as opposed to counter disinformation, have a look at 21st Century Wire's website. They've got a pretty extensive section on MH17. And also, as they highlight here, there's an MH17 documentary called MH17 5 Years On, being released today, if it hasn't already been. And maybe people might want to track that down and watch it. Patrick has put the trailer for that on 21st Century Wire a couple of days ago. So do have a look out for that. And we'll see where this takes us. Now, quick reminder, if you like what the UK Column does and you would like to support us, please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, where you can find options for helping us there. And a quick reminder that AV 10.1 is coming up in October. Tickets still available at alternativeview.co.uk, but the tickets are selling fast, so if you would like to go to that, you probably need to get a ticket reasonably soon. Now, I just wanted to mention this briefly. This article here from the Washington Examiner. It's headlined, Ousted UK Ambassador Leaked US Intelligence. This is all about Sir Kim Darroch, who of course has resigned as US Ambassador, or UK Ambassador to the United States. This article, speaking to two US government officials, one who's a current official, another a former official, they're speaking on condition of anonymity, but they've said that the US government had become what they described as alarmed at the repeated leaks of US intelligence by Sir Kim Darroch to a journalist in the United States. They were speaking to the journalist that wrote this is called Tom Rogan, and they are saying that these leaks were not related to the Darroch's private cables, which have been published by Isabel Oakeshott in the Daily Mail. According to Rogan, they're saying that Darroch leaked classified material to a journalist for a US-based media outlet on a continuing basis. They said that the leaks included highly classified originator control intelligence information designated to be distributed solely to other members of the Five Eyes intelligence community. and also may have included intelligence designated as US, UK only. One of the two sources said that the US government was so alarmed by Darrick's leaks that it launched an official investigation to find the source, and that person also said that the leaked intelligence was very sensitive. So this is a spectacular allegation if it's true, Brian. But I just want to remind everybody that as we pointed out last week, this earlier in the week, this article from the Sunday Mail this week, Sir Kim Darroch vouched for British ex-spy Christopher Steele, and remind everybody that Alex Thompson had said that to me that absolutely this would not be no ambassador or no Foreign Office employee would be vouching for any so-called ex-spy, Christopher Steele or otherwise, without the approval of the British government and the Foreign Office. So the question is, where does this leave the so-called special relationship? It's pretty clear from the noises that Trump has been making recently with respect to Darroch that there was more than just these cables and these memos behind that, because really, what did he say? He made comments in the cables that were being echoed in the mainstream media. So it's nothing that Trump hasn't heard before, but his criticism of Darroch was quite stern, shall we say. So, you know, I wonder what the truth is in this story, but if it is true, it's quite a serious issue.
I think it brings us into the realms, Mike, of what our government actually is and who is controlling the country. If you sit and you believe that we have elected MPs in Westminster and they are the people who are making the decisions on foreign policy or the economy, that takes us in one direction. If we say we've got a deep state actually controlling the country, that is funded by the global international banking interests, and these are the people that are actually pulling the strings on foreign policy, what's happening overseas in the Middle East or what's happening in America, then we come to a completely different picture, because who are these people and what are their objectives as they interfere in politics in America? David, very quickly, because we're coming up to the stops, to me it's clear that the model of government we think we're in with elected representatives is absolutely not true. We've got something far darker and more dangerous at work.
Well, it's certainly not functioning correctly. So I mean, you know, you've articulated it that way. I think really what we're seeing here with that other article that you've brought in, Mike, from America, really does shed some light on what Trump's modus operandi in terms of, if that was the case, if that article, and I'm caveating that with if that was the case, as to why he's gone about it the way he has. So if you jump forward to this kind of Five Eyes relationship, and this is something Richard Dearlove has continually spoken about with relation to Defence Union and veterans, the work there at Veterans for Britain, challenging in concert as we have the Defence Union. This is actually, we're now getting down to the nitty-gritty here with the Macmillan special nuclear contract relationship with America, where the nuclear arrangement with fissile material, submarines and reactors and so on and so forth correlated over into the Five Eyes intelligence network because of the principal nuclear factor. So this being so, all this is up in the air, and there is some other players and there's other factors, and of course we know that there's a big scene shift happening with Defence Union. So I think this sitting on the fence that we're getting from the elected members has to stop, because as you've said earlier on in the programme about the way that we would operate as a national force or in NATO or in anything else, if you can join that into this factor, really, you know, they can't be allowed to continue sitting on the fence, doing nothing and sitting in silence.
While a group of individuals buried in the Cabinet Office are essentially out of control with their politics and their relationship with the security services. Sorry, I had that in there just to force that home, David.
Absolutely. I mean, that's precisely what Lord Tebbit said to me on the telephone in the week. That is exactly what he said. He said that this would never have been allowed to happen under Maggie, and it was not her policy. But he was currently the current status was he was. I won't swear on air because I know you've got a policy that won't. But you know, he swore quite profusely. He said he was absolutely sick of the situation at the moment. And I agree. I think this is where we are. This is the situation is not tenable. It can't be allowed to continue. But people have got to start doing their jobs.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Well, we've run out of time for today's news. I was going to just cover a little bit about electoral fraud, which really adds another dimension to this, that we can't even rely on the process by which we get our elected MPs, but we'll save that for another day. Thank you all very much for joining us. If you're not a subscriber of UK Column, please consider taking out a subscription and or making a donation. We can only do what we do with your continued financial support. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.